Hello everyone, welcome back to Naomi's Bookshelf. I have read 14 books so far this month. I feel like I'm doing an end of the month wrap up, but here we go. So like I said, 14 books. I'm gonna put down the stack and we'll talk about what happened. So basically May 1st happened and I read 2 books in a day. And then May 2nd happened and I finished another 2 books. And then by May 5th, I had finished 7 books. I also managed to finish like a book a day. And I was like, hey, I can read a book a day. And I was feeling good. So it's May 15th when I'm filming this. And I haven't finished a book yet today, but I am like, wanting to do a book a day. So at the end of the month, my aim is to have another 17 books read. So hopefully that'll be the thing. I don't know. The goal is here to get a whole bunch of books off my TBR, to honestly get a bunch of books done and maybe unhaul a bunch of books, a bunch of small books. I'm not even aiming for small books, to be honest. Like I've read some big books. I'm trying to just get a bunch of books finished that I have been wanting to read. I have a bunch of readathons that I'm participating in, a bunch of library books that I needed to read, a bunch of book club books that I wanted to get done. And let me tell you, they're happening. So I'm excited. I'm not hating reading yet. However, when June hits, I'm planning on mood reading hard. I'm gonna do my TBR for Clue and that's it. I'm not doing much more. That's it. I will be doing a couple TBRs for, I will be doing at least TBR for the Pastoral-a-thon. I've seen that come up. And I've also seen the, box office TBR game that Mrs. Moody Reader does. So I will be doing those 2, but I'm not doing anything else. So I'm just enjoying my reading right now, which happens to turn out to be a lot of books. I've been rambling. Let's get into the books I'm reviewing. All right, I'm gonna grab off the top of the stack. They're in order by size, which means I'm talking about the worst book of the month so far, I think. That's A Home for Hannah. I read this one for Buzzword-a-thon. I will try to remember what I read them for and tell it to you. Anyways, this one is by Patricia Davids. This one is love-inspired. I read this one also for my TBR Jar, which I'm glad to get it off my TBR, to be honest, if it's not worth that much. It's 2 stars from me. This one is a disappointment. It's not a love-inspired suspense, but it kind of was acting like it. It's about this woman, what's her name? I've read a lot of books, so forgive me if I forget names. Anyways, Miriam, who finds a baby abandoned at her doorstep, and the baby's name is Hannah. And so she is trying to take care of the baby when Nick, thankfully the names are on the back of the book, when Nick is an officer, like a sheriff, and he is trying to help her find the mother of the baby. So that's kind of the book, and it was just really kind of disappointing. It was, no plot really. It had this mysterious element, but it was not, and it was just not really worth it. I give it 2 stars and I will be unhauling it. My next book was N or M by Agatha Christie. This one is my book for the World War II prompt of the 1900 to 1950 readathon. I read this one with Janelle from Too Fond of Books. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. It had espionage. It was my second Tommy or Tuppence book, which I ended up really enjoying. My first Tommy Tuppence book, I didn't enjoy, but I enjoyed this one. This one was so much fun. I loved how it had the twists and the turns. They are commissioned essentially to go and find out who are these 2 characters, because they need to find out 2 different people, N or M. They need to find out both of them, N and M, who they are in order to help stop the leaking of information to the Germans. I almost said Russians there. Not Russians, Germans. It's very interesting, very intriguing, and you just wonder, who is it? Who are these people? I actually guessed it right, so I'm impressed with myself, because I had a suspicion. And Janelle, I was like, I think this is it because no one ever would believe it. And she was right. And I was right. She said, I don't know. And I was like, I feel like that's the only reason why I would believe think this person's it. And I was right. So good on me. But I had no idea about the other person. No idea. But yeah, it was really good and I enjoyed that. So yeah, good one. So my next one was another Agatha Christie, which was The Secret of Chimneys. I read this one with Kevy and I read it immediately after, like the next day after reading NRM. And this one was a disappointment. I gave it 3 stars. 3 stars for the mystery. The ending let me down. Not in the way that the mystery wrapped up, but in the way certain things were handled. And it's personal, shall we say, which means the book did a good job, but it's frustrating for me. I already ranted to my cousin Megan about it, so she heard my annoyance with it. So at least I could rant to somebody, and Kevy heard me too. So I was not happy, but this one was good too. It was another kind of espionage one, which I was like, 2 espionage Agatha Christie's. Oh, I think that one was more well done. That one was better, and this one is clearly one of her first espionage books, which I do enjoy espionage, but not always this way. This one felt more clunky, but it did come together in a lot more cohesive way towards the end. So this one follows basically a packet of letters that are being blackmailed against a woman, and then there are a couple of bodies that follow the packet of letters, and some spies and some shady characters throughout Europe. It was good, but like I said, I was disappointed. This is a Superintendent Battle book, which I love his character. His character is my favorite Agatha Christie detective, partly because people always underestimate him and people always say that he is not as good as Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple. He is just as good. I will defend him to my dying breath, I think, at least when it comes to Agatha Christie. But he just always has the smart comments. He always is the smart one. And I think that I love his wit. I love his wit. But I did not love this book as a whole. So that's my disappointment. So 3 stars for this one. And I will do a spoilery review of this one later on. I have yet to film my review of my last 3 Agatha Christie's, but this will have a spoilery review of that in there. The Secret of Chimneys is for my prompt of a classic on my TBR Clue game and for the 1900 to 1950s readathon of a genre category being mystery. So my next book was a play, actually, because I was looking for something for the 1900 to 1950s readathon that was not a novel that I owned, and I found a play, which is George Bernard Shaw's Caesar and Cleopatra. So this one, I was looking it up, and apparently it was written in like 1800, but this book was not published, or this earliest version of the book was not published until 1900, so I think it counts. So it's counting for my non-novel prompt of that. Anyways, I read this. I'm giving it 3 stars. I know it's satire. It's like, it was just too whiny for me. Cleopatra's like a 14 or 16-year-old girl. I don't remember how old she was, and he was like a 50-year-old man, and I just didn't, I personally didn't like stand behind it. I didn't like it that much. I mean, it was okay, but I just think it would have been better to watch. So I appreciate for what it was, but I didn't really love it. So I do think that there is something to be watched about Bernard Shaw's writing later on, like watching another of his plays in the future, but I didn't love it, and I have owned it for a little while now, so I'm glad I finally read it and got it off my TBR. So this is one of those things where reading a book a day actually was like, ooh, I have this, let me get it off my shelf. So yes, I finally got this one done, and it was okay, but I'm glad it's done now. Also, I'm putting this one into my historical fiction category, as Home Before Dark definitely does not qualify for historical fiction. The next book I have on my stack is Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, or Lucy Maud Montgomery. First of all, I have a complaint. Why does this cover not say Kindred Spirits? I realized that as I was reading it, and I'm like, that title, that cover should have Kindred Spirits on it. I mean, come on. that phrase is one of the key things I recognize with this book. Anyways, this book was delightful, 5 stars, and is such a gem. And I loved Marilla. I just so connect to Marilla. I'm such a Marilla. I realized that as I was reading, I was like, I'm such a Marilla. I'm gonna be Marilla in like 30 years. 25 years, I'm gonna be Marilla. So I've gotta watch myself. But she, and like, I think I'm more connected to Marilla because as I was like reading it, I thought before that she had headaches towards the end, and I realized even at the beginning she was having headaches and like talking about it, and I was just like, I feel you, girl, I feel you. And I was like so appreciative of Anne. Like I loved Anne's like, you know, oh, I'll be careful and I'll help you. And I just loved Anne so much. Just Anne's joy of life and her sparkle and her determination, her gumption, her spunk. I loved how she was always like, I'll make mistakes, but I'll never make them again. And she was such a tender heart, but she was so great. And I loved the scene where she stole the brooch and she confessed, but she hadn't really actually. And it was like Marilla learned that Anne could be trusted, but that Marilla had to eat her own, like eat her pie. What is that? Marilla had to admit her wrongs, and I just loved their relationship. Oh goodness, I just love their relationship. And I loved Matthew, and I loved everything about this book, and 5 stars. It was brilliant. I read it outside in a park, and it was delightful. It was the perfect book to read outside. And if anyone needs a book to read in spring, this is the book to read in spring. My goodness. Anne of Green Gables is the book to read in spring. Like, the descriptions is the book to read in spring. For the 1900 to 1950 readathon, Anne was for the category of Own Country, as I am Canadian, and this is a Canadian book. So my next book was At Love's Command by Karen Witemeyer. This is the first book, at least in a duology, which is called Hanger's Horseman. This one is about Matthew and Josephine, who are just so cute together. I love this book, 5 stars, first of all. This one is just great because of their dynamic. So Matthew is what they call a mercenary, but he and his band of 4 men, so he is the one of the 4, they go around and deal with outlaws in the West. Basically, he's trying to atone for what happened during a lot of war events and when he was part of the army, and they go and deal with problems for locals. So they go and get rid of outlaws who are just like really struggling for, or really problematic for local towns. They are hired, and then they are getting rid of those people and bringing them to justice, where Dr. Josephine comes across them when one of the band is shot. And so they bring him into her, and she has to help them. It is really great and just so good. It deals with travel. It deals with country western. It's romantic, and it's not one of those books where, you know, they just discover their love for each other at the end. It's like a building process, and it's just like it's so good. Like, my dad loves watching westerns, and it reminded me so much of that, and like in a great way, and not in a really cheesy bad way, if you know what I mean. I think this is such a wonderful one to read, and I think it's great. Also, if you're going to be doing the Pastorathon, this is a really good one to read for that. It has a pastoral feel, and the book cover is a very pastoral look. Really recommend that. But yeah, it was such a good one to read. I can't express it enough. Yeah, and there was also an older couple too. She's 28 and a doctor, and she's basically resigned herself to a life of singleness, and he's 40 or just about to be 40, and he also has decided that no one would want him, and so they have kind of resigned themselves to singleness until one day they literally stumble across each other and have this instantaneous connection. It's a great book. I can't wait for book 2 to come out, which actually comes out on the 1st. So that'll be exciting. This one also counts for my NetGalley prompt for my board of TBR Clue. So the next one I have on the stack is Home Before Dark by Riley Sagar. I finally finished it. I did this one. I'm so proud of myself. It ended up being not as scary as I thought, but I think the problem is I just kept reading it after dark, which isn't a good thing to do. The haunting writing style of this is just not great when you're reading it after dark. When you read it before dark, it's not as scary. I think that's the difference. Anyways, I am putting this one into Mr. Green slot on my board because, first of all, the cover is very green, but secondly, I feel like the premise of this book fits the green category very well, as I described in my TBR Clue game. So the premise of this book is that Ewan Holt wrote this book called House of Horrors long ago when he and his family fled this house after being there for 3 weeks or whatever it was in order to save their family from all of these ghosts. And then she inherited the house and goes back after her father dies, and there is some stuff going on, and she needs to figure out, first of all, if she can sell the house because she just wants to get rid of it, and secondly, if what's going on is actually ghosts or not, if it's paranormal. I found it to be, like I said, spooky to read after dark. Just the writing style, Riley Sagar is really good at that, I think. However, when it came down to the Mr. Green aspect, I thought it was really good because, first of all, you're always questioning if Ewan Holt actually wrote the book as real or if it's just a money grab, because that's something I think Mr. Green would do. If he was living in this home, would he actually write a book to just get money? Would he? I think that's a very fair question. But also the fact that she's just trying to get rid of this house and sell it is a money grab too. So I think that's a very Mr. Green thing to do. So that's why I'm putting this in Mr. Green category for my TBR Clue. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. I didn't give it 5. I think it just didn't keep me interested the whole way through. And I think the last couple chapters were just so twisty and turny that it was too twisty and turny in my opinion. And that's what kind of lost me. However, I did really enjoy this, and I don't want to say too much more. It is kind of ghosty, kind of not, but you're kind of figuring out all along, is it ghosty or is it not? And you have to figure it out yourself. So recommend reading it though. The next book I have on my stack is The Body Politic by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This one is for my subscription box, so this one is for my TBR Clue game as well. And this one was interesting. It's definitely a food for thought. And I don't want to be too political because I hate talking politics in most terms. I don't talk politics on my channel intentionally. So let me just say this. I think this is an interesting read for our climate in our world. And I think it's just a thought. Okay? And when it comes to this, I feel like it was interesting at the time to take in consideration that this sparked the French Revolution, especially with those people who were there. It had interesting points on slavery and rights and justification for taking people's lives or enslaving them. Also expectations of taxes and different things. It was interesting, and it's a very quick read. So, I mean, it was powerful and it had a lot of interesting things to say. I would recommend checking it out if you are interested in that kind of history of things and political past. I'm not sure what I gave this. I think I gave it 3 stars. So yeah, it's worth the read though, I would say. Another book that I read was Banished, Surviving My Years in the Westboro Baptist Church by Lauren Drain with Lisa Pulitzer. This one, my mom recommended to me, and I really do love a good cult book or a cult story. This one is really interesting because it's about a Christian community, which is literally just one church, and it's not a very big church either, in Kentucky, where they are very anti the states, and they are very they're very homophobic, they're very anti-gay, they're very anti everything. They do protests against everyone. They have protested funerals, they have protested everything, they picket everything. And this book was about her experience with it. She moved there when she was 14 years old, and her family got heavily involved. So it was about her just joining in and being brainwashed into that culture, and then how she eventually was banished. It was kind of sad. It was sad to read about how these people believed these things, how they were taught that these things were okay, and how they were raised with this mentality that things like this is how Christians should be and believe. This is not, in case you're questioning, how Christians are or should be. This was an awful situation to read about. However, I'm giving it 3 stars for the writing quality. And I want to kind of state this, and I do want to have a future video discussing how to rate and discuss memoirs, I think, or nonfiction in general. Because memoirs, I think, are really important when you're discussing how to rate them. Because it's not like you're rating someone's personal experience. You're rating how the writing quality works, and how the story flows and transitions and all those things. And I think this was a 3-star book for that quality. But I do think that this is an important story that you should hear. I do have another book from the other person who left the church and wrote the novel about it. I think it's called, or not novel, but memoir. It's called Unfollow. And I am interested to read her personal story as well. It's higher rated, so I think it's probably better written. But I am glad I also read this one as well, as I think her story is also important. So it's a very interesting church dynamic. It's not a cult in the sense that it's very obvious as a cult, but I think once you look into their theology, it's not foundational, it's not theologically sound, and it's very anti anyone who's not them. So they have a very us versus them mentality. For some reason, the sun is going away, so I'm hoping the lighting won't be too bad. Next on the list, I have My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me. A Black Woman Discovers Her Family's Nazi Past by Jennifer Teege, written with Nicola Selmar. I picked up a physical copy from the library. This one I read for my diverse recommendation for my TBR Clue. This one was powerful. I gave it 4 stars. I didn't think all of the parts of this book were necessary, but it was good. Wow. So this book was divided into like 4 or 5 chapters, and it was based on how she talked with each member of her family. So she talked to think about her mother, her grandmother, her own experience growing up, and then did she talk about her grandfather too? I am forgetting. So the chapters are the discovery, when she first discovered a book with her mother's name on it, which was about her father, or so her grandfather, but her mother's father. Then chapter 1 was her as the granddaughter. Chapter 2 was about her grandfather, who was Amangotha, which was which I had no idea about this, but he is the commandant of the camp within like the Schindler's List. That's her grandfather. I have never watched Schindler's List, and I'm scared to now. I was scared to before, but now I'm like even more like, I know how heart-wrenching it is, and now I'm even more scared because now I know it's even more heart-wrenching than I thought before, based on what they said in this. How awful it sounds. So yeah, and then it talked about the commandant's mistress, so her grandmother, and then living with the dead, so her mother is the next chapter, and then the victims, so her friends in Israel, and then kind of her recovery after that. So that's kind of how it broke down into like 6 chapters. It's not a long book, but it was such an interesting book about how she kind of went through the different stages of embracing her history, but also like having to walk through it. She went and visited the camp where her grandfather was commandant, and she saw his home and where her grandmother lived. And she knew her grandmother and she knew her mother very well, but her grandmother, she knew. And so she was shocked that her grandmother was like loving to her as a Black child, as a mixed child, because of her history. And when she discovered that her grandfather was Amengoth, she was shocked at the horrors that this was. And she also struggled to be in relationship with her friends, Hopefully that fixes the lighting. Okay, anyways, she knew all of these Israeli people because she lived in Israel and she worked there, and she spoke Israeli, and she speaks Israeli, and so she discovered this, and then she knew her grandfather would kill these people all the time, and she had these pictures of her grandmother with these dogs that would eat people alive, and it was a hard read. I can't express to you how hard this book was to read, but it was powerful. It was worth the read. It was a book that I think everyone should read, and it talks about the trauma of the reading, because it's something where it talked about trauma of the Nazi trauma that these people had. So officers of Nazi officers, their children had trauma of being Nazi officers' children or Nazis' children. And then their grandchildren had trauma of having to deal with it because their parents wouldn't talk about it. And then their children would discover their family history, and then they had to deal with that. And so she had to deal with it doubly, of being an adopted child who felt abandoned by her mother, and having to deal with the adoption of, or being a former child of, or grandchild of, one of the most hated men in all of the war. It was a book. Very highly recommend picking this one up. My goodness. So the next one I have on my stack is a much lighter read, and that is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. This one I read for the Asian readathon. I read it in a day. It was sweet. It was romantic. I also read this one for a romance book club with my local library, which was great. I also loved the representation in this. An Asian author with autism speaking for an Asian character with autism was wonderful. I loved reading this. It was just so great. I am not someone who tends to pick up steamy books, but I was okay with it because of the representation. I just skim read or skipped those sections, to be honest. But I think I gave it 4 stars because of that, and I really do recommend reading this book. It was just so great. I thought it was a really fun read, and I really loved reading about her perspective and how she just dealt with the world. That was probably my favorite part, but I did love reading the romance and how she just was trying to figure out romance with autism, trying to kind of sabotage her in some ways, but at the same time with her just embracing that part of her as well, and with him and trying to embrace it. So Stella and Michael. So Stella trying to embrace that part of her, and Michael not caring that she has autism. So I love that part. I really recommend this one. And I feel like everyone else in the world has read this one, but not me. So I'm glad I read it, and I am also really glad I have The Bride Test by her too. So I have one last physical book and then 2 more non-physical books. The last physical book I have is The Hobbit graphic novel. So this is by J.R.R. Tolkien, but this is illustrated by David Wenzel and adapted by Charles Dixon. I've been talking for a very long time. I'm so sorry. This is a very old graphic novel, actually, and very well done, I think. The colors were really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. However, I felt like the text was really small. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah. So the text was really small in these boxes, and I would have rathered more pages with bigger text than how small that text was, because with my migraines and headaches, I was struggling with my eyes to see how small that was. So I would just rathered more pages with bigger text in those boxes than how small that was. However, really enjoyed this retelling of The Hobbit. I love these graphic novels of old classic books. So really recommend this one if you're wanting a graphic novel of a classic. Also, the graphic novel does count for a year of the 1900 to 1950s readathon, which I'm gonna go over the years now. So I have all the years written down in my book. Since I've talked about all the books now, actually, I haven't talked about all the books now. Let me talk about the rest of the books, because I have 2 more. So I read Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Balli, Kaur, Jaswal. This one I read for my book club, and I also read it for the Asian readathon, as she is from Singapore, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I did skip most of the erotic stories, to be honest. As I said before with the kiss quotient, not my thing, but I was really happy with the representation, and I was really interested in the cultural dynamics. I think I was odd and out in my book club with reading it though, so that's okay. I did like it though a lot, and I enjoyed Nikki's story. I enjoyed the dynamic of the women who were there and how they really opened up to themselves and talking about their personal experiences in that community and how they were starting to stand up for themselves because of their culture that they were in. So I don't know, I really appreciated what that book stood for and how it was of that culture. So I, like I said, gave it 4 stars, and it was for the Asian readathon. I'm also putting it in for my TBR Clue for the W spot, as it has widows in the title, so that's another square off my TBR Clue. So the last book that I read was by Jennifer Paxton, technically, and this is 1066, The Year That Changed Everything. This is a great course lecture series, so this is like 6 lectures, and I listened to it from Audible, and technically on Goodreads they are books, so I listened to it. This was pretty great. I enjoyed it a lot. It was, well, maybe not great. I gave it 3 stars, 4 stars. I'm checking my Goodreads right now at the corner of my eye. Maybe not corner of my eye though. It was 4 stars for me. I enjoyed learning what how Normandy took over and how William the Conqueror really just came in and swooped in. And I liked the backstory because honestly, I didn't know that part of history and how William the Conqueror was able to come in and claim the throne of England, and how the Vikings were there before, and how there was such a Nordic, or how it was so connected to that part of Europe beforehand. So I really appreciated that lecture a lot, or that series of lectures. I think it was a good one. I will definitely be putting in those lectures now with my Goodreads, because if they count on Goodreads, they're going to be added to Goodreads. To be honest, they are long lectures. Every lecture is like, you know, half-hour long, but they only count for like 3 pages for 3 hours, so it's not that, they're worth so much more, but they're counting now. So there we go. Now let's get into the years for the 1900s to 1950s readathon. I feel like this mid-month wrap-up is taking so long because I've read so many books, but let's just do it. And we have one last little detail to get into before the end of this all. So for the final challenge for the 1900 to 1950s readathon was to read a book from every decade. Now I have done that almost. I have here 1908 from Anne of Green Gables, and then I have the Chimneys, Secret of Chimneys, which is right over here, was 1925. Then The Hobbit, which is technically, even though this is a graphic novel, I'm counting it for this, which was 1937, and then N or M, which was 1941. So the only one I'm missing is 1910s, and I will be reading The Phantom of the Opera, and that will also be counting for my last prompt for that, which will be another country. So that's France. And that will be it for the 1900s readathon. And as you can tell, if you've been keeping track of how many TBR Clue rooms I've been finishing, I have one left, which is my TBR Jar pull. So my last room for my TBR Clue is Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was my TBR Jar pull for 2020 jar. And I did say that this would probably not be read because of like how heavy the content is, and I just don't feel like I'm ready for that. And as you can tell from most of the books I'm reading a lot of light mysteries, or a lot of fun books, or a lot of books I'm just in the mood for. And this, I'm not in the mood for, to be honest. It's really heavy content, and honestly, I haven't even tried because it's just kind of scary to me, and it's a really heavy book, and I'm already reading Wives and Daughters, which is already really big still, and I'm like making progress in that. So I don't want to be having too many heavy books or too many big books when I am like really enjoying my reading, and I don't want to be slumped. So I've already pulled a new book. So it's the 12th of May. I am filming this a bit in advance, and I'm just here to say I am not getting to Uncle Tom's Cabin. I just know in my soul I will not get to it. So I'm picking out a new TBR Jar pick. I've gone through them because I didn't realize that some of them I've already read. There weren't too many, unfortunately, but let's try and see if I can show you that I picked them. All right, let's do it. I'm not looking. I'm trying not to look, I promise. Okay, there are a couple good ones. This one, Booked to Die. So as you can see, the book that was picked was Booked to Die by John Dunning. I have started this one and I am not super thrilled with it, but I am glad to have a different book, to be honest. This one is about a detective named Cliff, and he is eager to put this man in prison. I can't remember the name at the moment, but he is investigating many homeless deaths that are quite aggressive and quite violent. And so he is determined to put this one man behind bars. However, it seems like he is kind of having tunnel vision, and the current victim has quite a unique skill set, or had quite a unique skill set of finding books and being able to spot the really valuable ones and buying them for like $1 and selling them for quite a high price. So this is the current book that I have pulled from my TBR jar. I'm only 35 pages in, so I'm hoping it will get better. I'm going to count it as read if I get to about 100 pages and I don't like it. So I will then unhaul it and I will call it a completed room. But I do want to do my best. The cover intrigued me enough to buy it, and the title intrigued me enough. And then on top of that, it looks like it's a mystery. I think the back said, which also I've noticed so far with reading it, is that Cliff is an avid collector of books and he finds solace in that, but he's also a detective. So it seems like there is a book lover of a detective, and that's going to play a big part in this book. So that is the case for my newest TBR pick, and that will be the final room for my TBR Clue. Now, due to complications, I've already put my books away. However, I've already read a lot this month. So please leave a comment down below about the books I've read so far, if you've read them and enjoyed them. Also, if you have made it to the end of this video, which is a very long video, if you could leave a little book emoji so I know that you've made it here, and just to say thank you to you for being here all the way to the end. If you're new here, please subscribe if you would like to, and you can also hit that notification bell if you would like to be notified whenever a new video pops up. I will see you next time with another video. Bye for now.